Look at this signal, everybody. Welcome to another of our Wednesday yachting luncheons. It couldn't be prettier out these windows. Holy cow, what a beautiful view we have. Let's see a little bit about future programs. You want to stop by in the Big Boat series because the world-famous yachting photographer Daniel Forrester will be here in September to talk all about making a living doing what he loves as a yachting photographer. Let's see, in August, you want to stop by to hear Brandon Southwell talk all about how to keep more whales in the bay. If you haven't noticed, now we have somewhere like 16, 18 at a time. The highest record has been 22 whales at the same time in San Francisco Bay. In June, Michael Ellis, the noted naturalist, will be here to talk all about the Mojave Lake, which is now a desert, once a lake. And Bob Devlin will be by to talk all about racing cars on the Marina Green that happened in the 20s and the 30s. He's a historian on these matters. He'll show us pictures and tell us all about that. In May, we'll have Bill Pearson come by and talk about the latest technology for 3DI sail making by North Sails. We'll have Ron Holland, the noted, famed naval architect, come on by and talk about his new book, All the Oceans, Designing by the Seat of My Pants. And Steve Tashia, chairman of the America's Cup Hall of Fame Selection Committee, will be by to talk about his process and about the America's Cup itself. In April, Bob McLaughlin, our friend and member of our yacht club, will be by to talk about his new book about the capturing of the U-boat 505, A Legion of Heroes. And Janice Corvu will be here to talk about sailing around the world with her family in a 30-foot boat. Who has sailed around the world with their family in a 30-foot boat? I don't see any hands. In March, we'll be listening to Jocelyn Nash talk about her 70-year career racing sailboats, including winning the Mallory Cup back in the 60s. And on the 21st of this month, R.C. Keefe will be by to talk to us all about a proper yachting history of the St. Francis Yacht Club. Holy cow. A little bit about our speaker today. He first got on a sailboat when he was age 10. It was a 29-foot keel boat in Long Island Sound. And then he spent a lot of time in his 30s cruising inside the Caribbean on different friends' boats. In his 50s, he double-handed from Nantucket from Block Island out to Maine. And he's a frequent guest now in the Pewauk Yacht Club because he has an art gallery in Southport, Connecticut. Art, separate and parallel track. His grandmother was a noted American impressionist in the 20s and the 40s. Who remembers the 20s and the 40s? And almost Marge Michael, my big sister, she just said something about the 20s and the 40s because she was around close to those days. Back to our speaker. In the third grade, he got his first art lesson from his grandmother. She began and taught him how to water paint. By the time he was a 10-year-old, he had a football in one hand and a paintbrush in the other, and he actually really contemplated, should I be like, Andrew Wyeth or like Y.A. Tittle? And so he imagined either direction at that point. He would later get a BA in art history from Delphi College and then get a Rockefeller Fellowship, teaching fellowship, and at the State University of New York at Binghamton, he would earn his PhD in art history. Since 75, he has been a professor of art history and visual culture at Fairfield University in Connecticut. Beginning in 2016, he was named the New York Times blogger on art history and visual culture. And today, to talk to us about Winslow Homer and the sea, please welcome Philip Eliasoph. Philip.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everybody, for coming. You don't say no to Ron Young. You don't say no. We were here at the father and son Christmas lunch and holiday lunch, and some of you, who heard the Grinch? Who was here for the Grinch reading? Some of you. Okay, great. Thanks for coming. It's really a pleasure to be here. I am very proud to be part of this Bay Area community. My son and my daughter are here, my daughter-in-law. We have 5 grandchildren living in Tiburon and Mill Valley. So Ron keeps saying, when are you going to retire, Philip? And it's coming, it's coming. Before I start my talk, I do want to just mention, back east this Saturday, there's going to be a memorial service for a very dear friend of ours, a chap named Bill Selden, who was out here in the early 70s. And Bill passed away. He was skiing in Vail and had an accident, and eventually he passed away. And so I just wanted to dedicate today's talk to my friend William Selden. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Psalm, the 107th Psalm. They that go down to the sea in ships, they see the deeds of the Lord. And then it ends with their wits' end. And you'd have to know the joyous and very comic and satirical personality of this friend, Bill Selden. So I wish him well. And to all the lost sailors, I'll dedicate this talk. Okay. So we're going to meet now in this discussion. Can we bring the shades down? Man versus Sea. Winslow Homer depicts the American hero. Okay. When I constructed this thought, I wanted to give you an overview of Winslow Homer's career and to try to reduce it to its essence. He was an artist, as we're going to, and I know many of you know his work, but what we're really going to look at today is an artist whose work is absolutely incomparable. His private life was inscrutable. Yep. Yeah, I'm trying to get here. I'm trying to forward here.
You like youngster. Exactly. Yes, Jimmy. What'd you bid? What happened here? Hold on. Hey, Bob, we're off screen here. Just a second. How'd that happen? I've got you. You just got to get the good show back up. It's not. Don't put any horn up. Go here. She's 33 feet long. Okay, Tommy, let's see what you got on screen now, mate. We may reboot. I don't know what to say here. Yes, yes, of course. The joys of live streaming. I have no idea. Hold it, Philip. I don't know what button was pushed. We're going to restart. I'm going to restart. Just relax. I'm going to restart the computer. I'm going to restart. There's always a first. Well, you've got it on the screen up there. I've got it. Thanks, buddy. We're rebooting right now. So, Philip, can you sing in the meantime?
No.
How about dance?
No. Enjoy your lunch. Let everyone enjoy their lunch. Enjoy the lunch.
When this starts, just keep pushing these. I'll do it together with you. Here we go. Yeah, hold on. You don't want this one. Hold it. You don't want that one.
You've got, Ron, photos. There you go. Run that.
See the date on that one? Is that going to work? March. Look at that. Is that the same one or not the same one?
Run that in presenter mode.
View.
See, do you see the words? Final March.
Yeah.
That's the final one or not?
Yeah.
That's not an earlier one. Okay.
That's
You follow what I'm saying to you?
That's it. That's
That is it. Okay, good.
March 14th.
Here we go. Just a second here.
You've got his show there.
Yeah, just a second. We're getting there.
And put me on presenter that I can see
Yeah, I
the
know.
next.
I know. That's what I'm doing. Now, only touch this. See this here?
Only touch that, yeah. Okay.
Forward. Okay, there you go. Meanwhile, back with our hero, Philip.
All right, sorry for the interruption. All right. What I'd also like to point out about this yachting series, this lunch series, recently a study was done on what people who are reaching retirement age are most interested in. 20 years ago, it was access to golf courses, access to fishing. Now it is access to higher education. And I think that it's a real compliment to what you're doing, Ron, what you're doing here with the club, what I'm sure Commodore Teresa is appreciative to be running this lecture series of this quality 52 weeks of the year, with the exception of Christmas Day, I understand, is really remarkable. And you're all very fortunate to have this type of lifelong learning with you, really. All right, so onward with Mr. Homer. When we meet Winslow Homer, I'll reduce it to 3 facts. Number one, his art is absolutely incomparable. His life is inscrutable, and the context that we're going to look at his life is clearly debatable. There are so many topics about him that are up for grabs. So we meet Mr. Homer here, and I wish you could be with me reading his personal journals and letters. They're at the library at Bowdoin College in Maine. And he is very particular about his tailoring and his clothing. This is a complete accident. I saw that outside Brooks Brothers is preparing for the next season's outerwear. Well, he wrote the most detailed letters to his tailor at Brooks Brothers. These seem to be jumping forward for some reason. Can we hold back? Let's go. Yeah, let's go back. Okay. All right. That's good. Okay, right there. Yep. All right. Homer's art is, number one, very experiential. Homer grabs nature and dabs her on his paper. And as you look at his work, you feel the blow of the salt breezes and shade your eyes from the dazzling glare. Evening Mail, 1874. Homer's art is right at the edge of American painting, almost on the avant-garde. The Art Journal in 1876. It is impossible to deny Mr. Homer's genius. It is equally impossible to be always satisfied with what he puts on the canvas. And then third, and the most problematic, is the social context of his work. Mr. Homer is wholly en rapport with American life itself. Appleton's Journal, 1879. If you visit Homer's home, which is 75 feet from the rocks at Prout's Neck, down east, this is where, really down east, we're out in Scarborough County. Some of you know it from south of Portland, Maine. And as you approach his property, this was the actual sign that was there. You understand, this is a man who is a complete recluse and hermit. This is a man who wants to be completely left on his own. He absolutely is warning off, and it reflects this kind of Yankee curmudgeon character of him living out here on the edge of the sea. He is much more than just the painter of Maine, and really he becomes a great international personality. Probably the dean of American art, the great Lloyd Goodrich. Mr. Goodrich was the director of the Whitney Museum in mid-century. He dedicated most of his life to the study of Winslow Homer. And it was Goodrich who really expresses that he was the most vital and colorful of the American artist. He appeals equally to the artist and the layman by his picturing of stirring aspects of nature and humanity, by the freshness of his vision, and by the high degree of his artistry. And I have a personal debt here to thank Lloyd Goodrich. He wrote the preface for my first book, and I remember having a long conversation with him. He was in his late 80s when we had that conversation about his lifelong work on Goodrich, and I told him how much I admired that, what a contribution he made. So when we look at the giants of American painting, as we look at 19th century art, let's look at the giants. There's Winslow Homer, there's Thomas Eakins of Philadelphia, there's John Singer Sargent, and there's the great Whistler. Of all of those artists, Winslow Homer becomes the quintessential American painter and the one most widely known, and especially in his relationship to the sea. A brief biography, he's born, he's absolutely Boston bred, 1836. His ancestor was Captain John Homer, who was a sea captain who comes from England in the 17th century. He's really a man who grows up a real Yankee with a seafaring tradition. By 1857, he is in New York City working at Harper's as illustrator for the magazine. And as we'll see, the war years will take its effect. And then he'll come out, and we'll talk about his life afterwards, as he will move from France to England and then back to New England. He dies in 1910. The subject of man versus sea becomes then that area of where the New England fishermen are going to find an incredible density of fish off the Grand Banks and the Georges Bank. Water that you have to understand in terms of the relationship of the economy of New England in the 19th century. Let's understand that the early Anglican population had ended by the 1830s and 40s, and largely by the 1880s became the southern Mediterranean, Italian, Sicilian population, and then, of course, the Irish immigration of the 1840s and 50s. Anyone who's from back east who knows Boston, knows the Northeast, knows that this is, in terms of Catholic identity, this is really a very important part. The relationship, the economy of fish to New England makes a lot of sense, and let's understand it is, for observant Catholics, it's over 100 days in the calendar year of abstaining from meat. So, you know, if you think about Catholic New England, the amount of the fishing haul becomes part of the New England economy late in the 19th century. And we're happy to see that the harvesting grounds and the fishing grounds out in the north, off the Georges Bank, is still very rich, and this is where his iconic fishermen are going to go find their catch. And the first image of all, which we hope is going to come up, no, it's not coming up, is the fog warning. Let's see if, okay, hold on. We'll try it. Hold on, try this. Yep, next.
Yes, perfect.
Painting's not coming in.
Let's go to the next one. Skip it.
No.
I don't know.
All right.
Skip it, yeah.
Okay. Okay, the image I was going to show of the fog warning, which didn't come in, is that quintessential image of the lonely sailor out here catching halibut off of Grand Banks. This is not the Homer. The one that I was going to show is not coming in. And you really understand, even from documentary photographs, of what it was like to leaving the mothership and going out in a dory. We have record catches of halibut as large as 500-pound fish being caught. And it's the weight of the fish, it's the sense of the fish versus the human cargo in these little dories. Here is the image I was referring to. Here is the image of the fog warning. It became a stamp in 1962. I'm purposely showing it to you in context on the wall at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. It becomes one of the solitary images, one of the most iconic images of American art. The isolation of the figure is what we're concerned with. In fact, this leads to a whole body of literature of the courage of the individual sailor, the individual fisherman. Kipling picks this up in Captain's Courageous. It becomes a bestseller in one of the best known movies of 1937 with Spencer Tracy, Captain's Courageous. What I'm seeing here is the building of a mythology. And that mythology becomes so worked into the American mythos that even if we update it to Sebastian Junger's The Perfect Storm, of the story, the tragic story of the Andrea Gale, a 79-foot long hauler coming out of Cape Ann, coming out of Cape Ann, Ron, hold on, we need to clear this. Escape. Okay. All right, go back one. Okay. Sorry. And I know from your reading of The Perfect Storm or from seeing it in the Hollywood version, the absolute terror of 6 days of 70-foot seas. I'd be putting on my diapers at that point. An earlier eyewitness of a nor'easter out of Gloucester who survived from the 80s. I'd be putting on my diapers straight up and straight down. The next thing I knew, we were upside down floating inside that boat. Now take this idea of the extraordinary courage, the extraordinary role of these solitary New England fishermen, as you see here. Take that idea, and now as if we could graft it, as if we could transpose that. Now we're just going to open this discussion a little bit more and take that mythic idea. Let's look at John Gast, one of the most popular Currier Knives images of the 1870s, Westward Ho, the Course of Empire. Westward Ho, the Course of Empire, is actually painted in the U.S. Capitol. You're looking at the Capitol building at the time of Lincoln's inauguration. And inside the Capitol, inside the House chamber, a German-born painter, Emanuel Leutze, he painted Washington crossing the Delaware. He painted that giant canvas in the Met. He painted a mural called Westward, the Course of Empire. Take a good look at the lower corner of just the lower eighth of that painting. Here, in fact, that term, Westward, the Course of Empire, takes its way. That was actually from Verses on the Prospect of Planting Arts and Learning in America by Bishop George Berkeley, and it was his vision, Bishop Berkeley, that established the University of California. His name was given to the University of California. Bishop Berkeley was actually a pastor who was working back in Newport. He had this idea that he wanted to educate the Indians of Bermuda, and he came up with this scheme that he was going to start a university in Bermuda. It failed, and his party, the Berkeley Party, are very well known in a large painting at the Yale Art Gallery of Bishop Berkeley and his educational enterprise. So we attribute this term, Westward, the Course of Empire, taking its way. And of course, the Manifest Destiny doctrine, articulated by John O'Sullivan in 1845, creates this idea of the ambition, the vision of empire, and who would carry that out. Here is the study of the mural. Here's the study for the mural. It's in the Smithsonian in Washington. And in this study, we see pioneers. We see a man in a coonskin cap showing the westward expansion. And what I'd like to focus on is this fellow in red holding his long rifle, because that solitary figure becomes, in a sense, that figure becomes the archetype of this image of the Western hero for America. He becomes the archetype of what will develop into the cowboy myth of the West, and the idea of the lonesome hero, whether it's the lonesome sailor in his dory or whether it's the lonesome cowboy of the West. This is a merging of the American myth. Translate that also onto the sea. Who would be the greatest solo sailor in in nautical history, it would be Slocum, right? It would be, just somebody said, it would be Josh Slocum sailing around the world. So there is this great passion for the idea of the first solo, the individual against nature. And this mythos, this archetype, this story continues. It's deeply woven into the American consciousness, whether it was, President Kennedy announcing we choose to go to the moon. During the 80s, not only for strategic reasons, but when President Reagan announced the high frontier, the idea of the high frontier strategy, he was really putting his finger on the pulse of an American tradition of the need, the quest for the frontier, for being out there alone in a place that had been uninhabited. And here we are looking at the view of San Francisco Bay as Leutze surveyed it, and here we have also the bay as, let's see if the map is not coming in. All right, sorry. All right, so Homer leaves his Boston home, comes to New York, and becomes the premier war correspondent of Harper's. He spends most of his time shuttling between New York City and the offices and the Virginia battleground. Many of you know this painting by Frederick Church. It's in the De Young, Our Banner in the Sky, and it really captures. Now here we see Homer for the first time. He would go back to his studio on 10th Street in New York City, and he created these wood plates that were then transferred into the Harpers. He was an eyewitness, and he had a press pass that allowed him to travel back and forth between the Confederate and the Union lines. These are eyewitness images done by Homer. The devastation of the Civil War, again, to think that over 500,000 men died in the conflict would leave a profound sense of solitude in him. And the very first major painting is this painting, The Veteran in the New Field, which is in New York at the Metropolitan. Think about this painting. Here's a veteran, probably somewhere in Massachusetts. He's wearing his Union breeches. He's wearing a pair of flannel pants. His canteen is in the lower right corner. He's returning to this is his reconciliation painting after the war, and the idea of the sower, this idea of the regenerating nature. We understand that if we could look at works of Bruegel or Van Gogh. Well, he knows that he has to go to Paris in order to get a proper art education. And so he leaves for Paris in 1866. He arrives in Paris, and you can imagine that he is immediately influenced by the palette, the high-pitched atmospheric palette of the Impressionists. He is certainly aware from his social conversations. He's meets Renoir and Monet, and the painting on the lower part is 1867. This painting was produced in Long Branch, New Jersey in 1869. Complete transformation of his art. He is the first American, actually, to be given a one-man exhibit at the Musée des Arts Américains at Giverny, the first American to be given that honor. Now, he goes back to England in 1881-82, and this becomes a real turning point. He arrives at the English coastal village of Cullercoats. This is up Tyne and Wear. This is up in northeastern. You're almost up as far as Newcastle on Tyne. And it's here that his work takes on a new sense of sobriety and solidity. Very unsentimental. He's so impressed with these fisher folk, these fisher women, who become these heroic characters, dramatic in their sobriety, dramatic in their instead of the lightness that he had in his impressionist stage. Now there's a new type of image. In fact, the feminist scholar Elizabeth Johns writes that in these women, they are no longer dolls who flaunt their millinery, but they are sturdy, fearless. They are fit wives, mothers of men who are fully capable of enduring the forces and vagaries of nature alongside their men. The Color Coats period is the turning point early in his career. He then returns to New England, bases himself, he's in Gloucester on Cape Ann, and again, resuming that interest in the life of shipbuilding. I'm sorry, this image isn't coming up, and some of these are not coming up. And then we come to this, now we have a lot of X's here. All right. Sorry, this is... And now we have a... Well, good grief. We have a... No, I'm sorry. These are not coming in.
Let's do something. Let's go here. Just a minute. Let's go. Let's just do it right here. Hold on. Let's go here. Go here. Just a second. That's why. Let's get rid of that. Let's just close that. Let's go here. Hold on. Just a second. Documents. Good heavens. Now we're going to run straight to it. This is off the hard drive. Tommy, you follow me? This is off the stick, or off of my hard drive. You see where you are?
Yep. Let's see if they're coming in now. No, now the X's. Now they're...
How can it possibly be? I don't understand. This is right off the hard drive, right? Why are they there? I have no idea, Tom. Give me the stick back, Tom. Let's do this. Hold on. Just a second. This has never happened, but that's part of the... Save.
I have a stick
I have right
also
here.
in my car.
This is it. Hold on.
Go out to my luggage. Let's try it off the stick.
Don't touch the stick. First time for everything. What the heck?
Could you give him a glass of water?
Bring water up. Good idea.
Thanks.
There we go. Yeah, we're going to be straight off the stick now. We're actually just doing this to test to see if you guys have been paying attention. Now, which slide were we on? Here we go. Presenter view.
Go ahead. Yes. While they're doing this, anyone ask a big question? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Well, I love to use the 8 bells painting of Sexton reading on the Grand Bank.
It's
Here we
coming
go.
up in the lecture.
I use that as a flyer for my celestial navigation class. And can I assume that
It's-
these images are all public domain?
It's got
Yes.
X's on it now.
Yes.
Came right off the stick with X's.
You can use any image you want as long as you're not going, as long as it's for an educational, for a public lecture, education. Once you go into print, then you have to, 8 bells, you'll have to go to Phillips Andover Academy, Addison Gallery. If you print it,
So there is an owner. If there,
absolutely. 8 bells is owned by the Addison. If you use it in print, you have to have a release for it.
Here's what we're going to do. I've got a backup of your slideshow.
Let's put it right in here.
And we're now on the air, and I'm just going to play it.
Advance it. Good. Perfect.
How do I know when I'll go next? I'll say next.
You'll look here. You'll keep looking up
All
here.
right.
And you'll watch it on the screen. We're live streaming this. This will look really good on the live stream.
Okay.
Keep going. You look here.
It will not pop up on how
There we go.
There we go. Okay.
Keep going.
Okay.
Perfect.
Stop right there. Okay. Good.
Perfect.
Stop right there.
There
Okay,
we
good.
go.
All right.
When you want to go to change and
Just go next.
All right.
Perfect. Perfect. Philip, you can set it right there.
belts and braces.
Perfect.
Good.
All right.
Triple back up.
All right. Thank you. Well, as you can see, the bay has not changed very much since 1861, since Leutz first painted it. But you could see that if you go to the Smithsonian, that painting. Okay, next. Next. We're going to do like the old slideshows in college. Okay. All right, next. We'll go through the Civil War now. Next. I'll give you a click like this, Tom, all right? All right. Next. All right. And then here. This was what I wanted to show, that the eternal nature of Homer's art, as you recognize in the universality of an image like Van Gogh's Sower. Next. Arrives in Paris. Next. Clearly understanding the new Impressionist palette. Next. Long Branch, New Jersey. Next. And at Giverny. Next. The only American to be honored with a one-man show. Next. Color coats. Next. And here are these solid, remarkable. This is where the imagery and the discussion on Winslow Homer and women, this is where we begin to enter into this conversation. When I said that his life was inscrutable, many forests have been cut. Many trees have been destroyed with scholars trying to crack into Winslow Homer's private life. He was completely enigmatic about his private life. Let me tell you this, as you begin to see these images of these fisher women at color coats, he had a romantic relationship with a woman named Helena Decay in 1872. He wrote the most romantic letters, this filled with sentimentality, and she left him for a poet-writer 2 years later. Apparently, he never recovered from that. Now, there is another body of literature, and again, this is all in this debate going on because he lived this very solitary life. There's some interest in his personal life. There was a Boston policeman that he had a friendship with, and he often posed this policeman in dresses as female models. So then there's a whole body of literature of his work. Was he gay? Was he non-sexual? This is all really just in the realm of gossip, and no one will ever really know this. He's completely private. The most passionate, best insight into Homer's personal life are the letters to Helena Decay, but that ends in a disaster, and he never recovers. He remains a bachelor until his death. Next, please. Next. Come in. All right. We're in Gloucester. Next, please. And here in Gloucester, he begins doing illustrations where he's talking about hopefully America will regain its superiority in shipbuilding. And these are drawings that get transferred into journals like the Harper's. Next, please. Here's the great painting of Breezing Up. Here's Breezing Up. And as you look at Breezing Up and you think about this iconic image, it's a father with his three sons, and the youngest son is looking off the starboard side, and he has no idea of the danger that could be out there. It's almost the halcyon calm before the storm. One really senses that the father there, in this catboat off of Gloucester, is completely aware of the danger that's out there, while his three sons remain a little bit, playful and not aware of what's coming. Next, please. Next. Okay, coming. Okay. And this is just a tighter, better view of the catboat. Perfectly understanding of the weight and the balance and what's going on with the wind. Next, please. 8 bells. There you go. There you go. I'm sorry, what's your name, sir? Paul. There you go. There's 8 bells, which is at the Addison at the Phillips Andover Academy. Okay. Here he takes something so mundane, just doing the celestial navigation, and he turns it into something so incredibly heroic. The prosaic becomes the heroic. Next, please. Next. This is actually a sextant owned by Homer, and this was we actually have this in the exhibition at Phillips Andover. And Homer is never a voyeur. He's never vicarious. He did several cross-Atlantic crossings, and he was always on deck. He wanted to observe the sailors, to watch how they did it. These are done from direct sketches, direct from life. Next, please. Next, please. Now, many of you would not know that the biggest maritime disaster before the Titanic was the Atlantic. The Atlantic sunk off of Halifax in 1873. More than 500 souls were lost. It was not until the Titanic that there was such a large loss of life. And you can see these illustrations. Homer was fascinated by this. Of course, he did his own reporting. And next, please. And he cuts this image of this woman who has washed up ashore, one of the victims. And it's a fascinating image with her left hand held above her head. This is sort of the image used in classical Hellenistic sculpture of Diana or of any of the goddesses. And it's a very poignant image. Next, please. Because there's almost a kind of melodramatic presentation of her. She's still holding on to the lifeline. She's still holding on, frozen. They froze to death, and she was washed ashore. Now, what's fascinating about this imagery, it's very heroic, is that he would have seen in Paris, next, he would have seen painting like Cabanel's winner of the Salon of 1863 in a very different context, but he seemed to have recycled this type of imagery to do a kind of eyewitness reporting of the sinking of the Atlantic. So it's a fascinating transition. Next, please. Now, this is one in the canon of Homer's work. The Lifeline is really one of the great moments. This was a transfer. This is a transfer using a canvas sling, something called a breeches buoy. And using the block and tackle, this damsel in distress, this woman is caught dangling from the block and tackle as she's being transferred from one boat to another. An image like this, and now we're going to go in real sharp, go into the next detail. This is almost the eroticism of danger for a late Victorian audience. In the 1870s, it's not the bust line, but it's the length of a woman's skirt that mattered. This is, imagine up to the can of the 1890s. And the idea that this woman, that so much of her stockings was being shown, and even the way the pelvis and the groin area, this was a shockingly frank and candid image, the Lifeline. Very candid for the early 1880s. And it's also the drama of the moment, this holding this unconscious woman as she is being, almost swallowed by the sea. The way Homer edits this, the way he pulls us into the drama, again, I call it this almost eroticism of the danger of the moment that he perfectly composes into this scale. It's really one of his great paintings. Next, please. And here again, and here's a scene that he observed at Atlantic City. This was an actual rescue of the very virile male lifeguards. The men themselves are almost a force of nature. There's a kind of straightforward vitality to the men in this scene. The women are again contextualized as demoiselles. They're completely in distress. They're almost hopeless. This has caused criticism of Homer in the literature, that he's it's all about the male life force versus the helplessness of the female. And what I would ask you is, knowing that this is hopelessly fraught in the conversation, we in 2018, we can't look at these paintings understanding the social, political, cultural context of the language of today, of the academy of today. You can't look at this in the context of Time's Up or Me Too or any of the feminist issues being addressed. If you look at it in that, and to say, well, the women are hopeless, Victorian women, you'll not understand that he's actually trying to use these characters in a type of elusive dialogue between the virility of the male and the female. They are complicated. They're not easy, and there's a ton of literature as he breaks through these taboos. Next, please. And to tell you about how classic he was, there's a fantastic drawing at Williams College at the Sterling Francine Clark at Williamstown, Mass. And this drawing shows that Homer is taking a real-life documentary scene of a rescue, and he's transposing it into the most classical image from the Parthenon, of Phidias, of the Parthenon marbles, the Elgin marbles in London. So he's turning this into something timeless. Next, please. Well, Homer admitted, and he said, in the end, I will be best known for my watercolors. Helen Cooper, the curator at Yale University Art Gallery, did a fantastic retrospective of the watercolors, and that's the definitive book, Helen Cooper's book on Hopper. It was done in the 1990s. And it's really with the watercolors that his dexterity as an artist, his virtuoso work as an artist comes through. Next, please. Homer was the beneficiary of a very affluent family. The painting I just showed you of the Lifeline, just to give you an idea, that painting sold for $400, which was a very big price for an American painting. In 1881, it sold for $400. Homer would winter off of Key West and in Bermuda. And because he wasn't in his studio at Prout's Neck, because he needed the immediacy of air and light and the transitory nature of light, this is where he allowed watercolor to be his medium. And he said, in the end, I will be best known for my watercolors. Now, we could argue Homer's watercolors versus Sargent, and art historians could go back and forth and really argue that who was the greatest master, but it really doesn't matter. It's just a conversation. But it is here. Next, please. Oh, did we just drop one? Did we go back one? There we go. It's here in this brilliant light in the Caribbean and off of Bermuda and off of Key West that we really begin to understand his incomparable role as a painter. We understand that he's an artist who takes the most mundane image and turns it into something which is glistening in our eyes. And if any of you have tried, either as amateurs or Sunday painters, if any of you have tried to control the watercolor brush, you'll understand what is absolute virtuoso quality to these watercolors. He almost takes the watercolor and pushes it into the realm of modern abstraction. I mean, you can look at the sky, the clouds in Homer, and you realize this is close to what a Milton Avery or what a Mark Rothko will be painting in the mid-20th century. He's that prescient. He's that far. He's that visionary in his work. Next, please. Here's another one, the Conch Diver, going for the conch. Again, look at those layers. Now, obviously has another issue because Homer is one of the few Americans in the late 19th century who paints black Americans. He paints them right after the Civil War. He paints them, obviously, he comes from an old abolitionist family. He's obviously celebratory in the manner of the heroic imagery of John Brown, and he makes black figures into heroic individuals. He individualizes. Today, it wouldn't be African Americans then. They would have been freed slaves, or in this case, islanders. But he treats them in a very dignified and a very humane way. And there's much literature developing about why Homer, especially from an old Boston abolitionist family, why he chose so many black subjects. Next, please. Well, here is sort of every drama has its great catharsis. Every drama has its great moment of, hold on to the rail, hold on now. And this is one of the first paintings purchased by the Metropolitan Museum by an American. The Gulf Stream, 1899. It was purchased in 1905 for the permanent collection of the Metropolitan Museum. And it's really one of the first absolute American masterpieces. This is a painting that takes the theme that I had presented earlier about the individual somehow charged with divine destiny, manifest destiny, who is, as a human, is caught out in the jaws of nature, caught in and is about to be swallowed by nature. What could be more horrific for this islander to find himself dismasted, pulled into the Gulf Stream? Next. Here's Rembrandt at his easel, and here's Homer in 1899. My photos of him earlier didn't come up. And he's the first American to be enshrined as a major old master in the Metropolitan Collection. Next. The Gulf Stream is not only a great painting, but it's also a great scientific statement of the age. Homer is very well read. He's very aware of the latest scientific knowledge. He is aware of when he paints this individual lost, pitted against the wild forces, the howling forces of nature. He's aware of Darwinian survivalism, and he's going to depict that Darwinian idea into the painting and then set it into modern oceanography. It was Matthew Maury, next please, Matthew Maury, who was trained as an oceanographer. Later he resigned his commission in the U.S. Navy and became Confederate admiral. And it was Maury who was the first to map the currents, and who actually, at this time, we know that Maury was lecturing at Harvard in the 1880s, and Charles Homer, the brother of Winslow Homer, actually knew Maury very well, and so he was very aware of this scientific study of ocean currents, the Gulf Stream. Next, please. So here's the detail. I want you to think about this in terms of a 19th century paradigm. You're alone. It's enough to be out there, out in the Atlantic, in the blue water of the Atlantic. It's enough to be out there, but to be dismasted, to be rudderless, and then to have this circling predators. Here you have the perfect symbolism, metaphor of man against the elements of the 19th century. It's a perfect image of how he dramatizes it in the painting. Next, please. And he was fascinated. We see his sketchbook and his watercolors are filled with these images of the lone black islander who is either about to be overturned, about to sink, and is about to be swallowed by the great jaws of nature. Swallowed. Next, please. In fact, for any of my students that I terrorize in my American art lecture, This is the first great American painting by John Singleton Copley of Boston. And Copley, you know, Copley Square in Boston. Copley was America's greatest native-born son. Sadly, his father-in-law was a Tory who had his tea thrown overboard in the Boston Tea Party, and so he had, with his beautiful wife Suki, they had to leave for London in 1775, and he painted this in London, John Singleton Copley. But it's an incredible image coming from a Bostonian. It's the story of Brooke Watson, who was a ship he was 14 years old, and he was lost overboard on a British man of war in Havana Harbor. Brooke Watson is in the water, and he is actually about to be, next slide, and detail. We have a next slide. Here we go. Oh, in his consciousness, he was looking at Delacroix, Dante, and Virgil in hell. Next. That's Brooke Watson with his wooden leg. The shark did eat off his right leg, and he was swallowed by nature, literally, Brooke Watson, in the shark attack in Havana Harbor. Remember, Homer knew this painting very well. Next. And here it is. Man versus nature. The eye of the shark, the open, gaping mouth of the shark, the eye of Brooke Watson, his eye and mouth. Man against nature. Who wins? Nature. Next. As in Darwin's Origin of the Species. Well, I know you're all relieved to see that anonymous, iconic black native sailor somehow gets washed ashore as flotsam and gets washed ashore. I mean, whenever I show this in class, the students start cheering, you know, they made it, he made it out of the Gulf Stream, he's alive, he's alive. Next, please. He made it, he makes it offshore. And so the sunset years end up, he becomes, Homer, even more reclusive in his old age. He's quite internalized. His paintings become very quiet and there's a lot of solitude in these final paintings. Next. Now these are women just on the rocks at Prout's Neck. Solid, dignified, incredible in their power. Next, please. My colleague at the New York Times, Holland Cotter, writes about Homer's paintings at Prout's Neck at the end of his life. These paintings carried mysteries, but their mysteries weren't divine. They could be measured in knots and fathoms and the mark of the artist's hand. And so what we have here is the exemplary painter of the 19th century, a man who observed the nation's social and political changes through war, through changes in technology, but it is about reducing it to the individualistic spirit of the American character, the character of the search for the West, the search for the ideal, the search for the lost horizon. Next, please. He was buried. Homer is buried with his family, with his brother's family, at the cemetery in Cambridge, in Boston. Next, please. And I guess my final slide didn't come up. All right. I had one more slide to end it. I hope that in presentation today you understand that here was an artist who really celebrated American individualism and understood the heroic nature, the good, the bad, and the ugly, but the heroic nature of the individual against the elements. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay.
Wonderful. We're visiting today. Welcome to our Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. We're visiting with Philip Eliasoph, Professor of Art History and Visual Culture at Fairfield College in Fairfield, Connecticut. Test. So, Philip, first of all, when and why did Homer start painting? What caused him to begin picking up the paintbrush and becoming an artist?
As I said, he came from an old, well-to-do family, and we know that just very early in his life, he took to illustration. You have to understand the idea of becoming a professional painter was very far off. He was more learning the tools of the trade of what an illustrator would do. He wanted to be a commercial illustrator.
At what age did he start drawing or painting?
I don't know that, but I would say probably 10, probably at 10.
And so he first started in journalistic drawings.
Yep.
For Harper's Magazine.
Yep. Yes.
And he was making his living thus as a young man, as an artist. Did he sail much? I mean, there's lots of sailboats in the imagery we saw today.
Well, we know that obviously anyone who was traveling from Boston to the continent, that he was fascinated with his cross-Atlantic journeys. He kept great records, great notes on that. And obviously when he started to visit Florida, Key West, and Bahamas, he realized that would be his subject matter, being in the islands.
So did he have a position on slavery? Was it obvious that he took one position or another? What was his position?
There's no written evidence of him. He comes from clearly a very strong abolitionist family, but there is one painting in New York City that is done right after the war that he shows the former slaves now as liberated human beings, as free people, and it's a very sympathetic point of view. It was a very sympathetic image.
So his office was in New York City, you said in 10th Street?
His studio was on 10th Street. That was the famous building, the 10th Street studio. That's where eventually Robert Henry and the Ashcan artist would all settle.
So did he become affluent in his lifetime?
Well, he had a journeyman career as an illustrator, working for Harper's. He was paid. He did travel. He achieved professional success in that his work was at the premier salon of the National Academy show beginning in the 1880s. He was really at the top of his game. He would have been known as one of America's foremost artists by the 1880s.
So by middle age?
Yes, by his 40s.
Now, I'm going to keep asking Philip questions, and if you have a question, you'll put your hand up, and John will bring you the mic, and I'll go to your question. And Janet Heineken.
Hello. I do a bit of watercolor, and he is absolutely my icon. I mean, and I'm interested to know, it's really interesting to hear the broader context of what was happening in the world during his time that he painted, but his ability to use the medium, the way the textures and the pigments interact with the paper, I've never seen anyone like him. I mean, he can draw a wall, just a plaster wall, and I could look at it for 45 minutes. Who trained him? Who were his influences for technique? Or was he just making this up on his own?
No, he did study at the National Academy School in New York City. But I think the secret of his watercolors is this sense of editing and this sense of this dour, severe New England character. He really understood simplicity. And that, as those of us who, in my clumsy attempts at doing watercolor, what happens is we end up loading too much into the brush. He is very sparse. It's almost, I was going to show, my final slide was of the Kurosawa, that famous image of the wave from the Japanese woodcut of 1833. And instead, that idea that he had a real implicit understanding of the simplicity of design, even in the more complicated paintings like the Lifeline, or he understood the dynamics of the depth of field, 2 versus 3 dimensions. So the secret of it, it's in the touch, as you know, in watercolor.
So you mentioned a couple of times his notes. Did he write very much? How do we know about him? Was he covered at the time by journalists as he gets older and more famous?
He was aggressive in forbidding anyone to interview him. That image I showed you of snakes and mice and don't come in, that represented his character. He did no interviews, and that's why his career is so cryptic. There's very little that he is being interviewed, very little on the record. We only have to look at his letters, journals from that are up at Bowdoin College.
John?
Did he have any interaction with Richard Dana?
I don't know that. Sorry, I don't know that.
So as he's painting these, what we know as iconic imagery that begin to form the American kind of myth, the frontier, the frontiersman, do we know that he's conscious of that? Is he saying things to anybody about his role in modeling what we'll know as the iconic American? Is he ever quoted as being conscious of that?
Homer, being in Boston and New York City, was very aware of the westward movement, and though he was not part of that adventure movement, he was not like Frederick E. Church, who came out here, or Thomas Moran, or Albert Bierstadt, who came west, or even Leutze. Emanuel Leutze came west and saw this panorama of San Francisco Bay. He was an Easterner. He wasn't. It was too uncomfortable for Mr. Homer to travel out west. He was not going to do that, but he would have been very aware of the compromises being made. He was very aware of what was going on with the Kansas Compromise, and he was very aware of what was going on politically. He was very sharp in that regard. He was very well informed.
Paul?
Yes, Paul. Hi.
Where are the best collections, museum collections, where we can see a lot of his work?
Metropolitan Museum, Boston Museum of Fine Arts, and the Sterling and Francine Clark collection at Williams College, Williamstown. They have a real hoard of Homer drawings. But the best paintings are in New York and Boston because they were acknowledged very early in the career as masterpieces. So they were purchased by the leading museums.
So we saw when he goes through he gets influenced by the Impressionists. Did he ever express anything about it? Was he enthusiastic? Did he like the French Impressionists?
No, he rarely expressed his delight in anything. He really was a curmudgeon type character. But the idea that his palette was so influenced by the Impressionists in that return from Paris in 1867 shows that he was aware of a new type of imagery. You have to remember that Paris in the 1860s was coming off of the Barbizon style, which was a very dark and tonalistic style, and he was now going to brighten the palette and bring it. He was really he and Mary Cassatt were really one of the earliest to bring the Impressionist palette across the Atlantic. Yes?
What was driving his interest in the pathos that you see in the film? Or in the
That's a great question. I think that is his great contribution, that he saw the drama of quotidian reality, of simple reality. And I know that some of those paintings, when we look at them, the drama, the women being so helpless, being carried off, but you have to think of him as a documentary filmmaker today, painting these elaborate canvases and really trying to show a moment, trying to capture a moment on a canvas. And I think that's why he stood above all others of his time. He really understood the drama of the moment.
Do you think it was his education or his family background?
I can't. Who knows why the great artists are? Who knows?
So who were his buddies? Who were his friends? What was his social life like?
None. Zero. He really was a hermit. He was a hermit. He did, and especially after the disaster, the disappointment with Helena decay, he withdrew even more into his own reclusivity. When you go, has anyone here ever been at Prout's Neck or know that part down east in Maine? Does anyone know Portland, Maine, or Okay, let me tell you how to do this. If you come east and you're sailing up in Camden, or because I know we have a lot of sailors here. Okay, you have to contact the Portland Museum of Art. They have titular responsibility for the Winslow Homer studio. That studio you saw in my slide was rebuilt. They spent about $10 million renovating it. It just opened 3 years ago. You can only go by appointment. You have to go to the Portland Museum of Art, and in a black Mercedes van, they will transport you, the lucky 10 people in the van, out to the studio, and then you have an hour or two with a docent, and then you get back in the van and whatever. You're not allowed. It's a very private part of the world, and they don't want visitors, but you have to do it through the Portland Museum, and and you have to plan ahead. It's like getting in to see, a rare chapel. It takes time to make the appointment.
Jimmy.
At that National Gallery in Washington, there's the painting of the father and three boys, The Breeze is Up. Just around the corner, there's a very, very similar one. Was it his style to paint more than one painting of a same scene?
He did many of those catboat scenes. He did many of those. You're saying there's another Homer also around the corner? Yeah, those were his Cape Ann Gloucester years. And he liked the movement, as any of you know as sailors. It's all about the physics of the air, the atmosphere, the light, the horizon. He really made that a subject, and that's why he did that repeatedly. Those are his best-known images, in fact. The other images up in New England would be in the Adirondacks, in the forest. He does a lot of hunting scenes, and he has scenes of fox and wolves out up in the forest. But the sailing images, the water scenes are his best known.
So did he paint from photographs ever?
No.
So would he set up a model, and how did he usually bring back the images he's going to paint?
He had the scene you saw, the image of the rescue, the undertow, where the women are being brought in by the lifeguards. Those were studio models set up, classical Académie des Beaux-Arts style, set up as though they were posing for Poussin or for Jacques-Louis David. I mean, those were classically posed models.
So we're talking about a person who goes from being a journalistic illustrator to actually being a pretty renowned painter. What was the highest priced painting in his lifetime? And we're speaking today with Dr. Philip Eliasoph, professor of art history and visual culture, and a blogger for the New York Times, we'll add, at our Wednesday yachting luncheon. So what was the most anyone ever paid in his lifetime for one of his pieces?
I think that when the Metropolitan Museum purchased the Gulfstream in 1905, that probably would have been the highest. And I don't know the number, but it would have been, at that time, maybe $1,000. A painting like that today, if you talk, Ron, about market, Winslow, he was a prolific artist. Winslow Homer pencil and charcoal drawings will sell on the market today for $50,000 to $150,000. A Winslow Homer watercolor will sell at $1 million to $2 million a watercolor. And a great Homer. Oh, there actually are no great undiscovered Homer paintings. They're all out there. But if there was a transaction of a Homer from a private sale, a Homer painting today would probably fetch, I would say, $30 to $50 million. $30 to $50 million.
How many paintings did he do in his lifetime, Philip?
He was prolific, and I think that the final number is probably about north of 200.
And what about watercolors? How many?
Watercolors would be maybe up to 800 to 1,000 that are considered presentation quality. There are lots of sketches. Lots of sketches. Honestly, if you want to own a Winslow Homer, everybody, do it, because they're still out there. I come from the world of don't be buying contemporary. I don't know about where the contemporary market is in 10 or 20 years from now. I would urge you not to buy a Jeff Koons puppy or anything. Winslow Homer drawings and watercolors I see them all the time. They come up in the Christie's and Sotheby's American sale, Heritage sale, and if this is your life desire, you should go for it, because I'm sure 1,000 years from now, people are still going to value the Winslow Homer watercolors.
So finally, he's had this incredible career. It spans most of his adult life. He's famous. Is he happy in the end? Is Winslow Homer happy in his old age?
I'll leave that elusively, enigmatically as an unknown. I think his great testament would be, let my art speak for me. I couldn't possibly speak for him.
We've been visiting today with Dr. Philip Eliasoph, Professor of Art History and Visual Culture at Fairfield College. Thank you very much, Dr. Eliasoph. The luncheon is adjourned. How about that?
Okay. So what do you think happened?